transformar as TIC em Portugal, na Europa e no mundo. Muito obrigado a todas as pessoas presentes nesta mesa, porque estou certo que ajudarão para esclarecer esta questão que é cada vez mais fundamental no mundo das nossas empresas. Compete normalmente ao moderador reforçar o tema base desta conferência, que é o Restart. Eu, com a autorização da APC, que espero que me deem agora, não vou chamar esta sessão uma sessão de Restart, mas sim uma sessão de reinstalação. Normalmente os processos de Restart levam-nos ao ponto de partida e corremos o risco que tudo volte a acontecer da mesma forma que aconteceu. Portanto, os mesmos problemas, as mesmas situações. Portanto, nós estamos a falar de um processo de reinstalação, de recriação da forma como as TIC se posicionam na nossa vida diária, não só como utilizador comum, mas também como empresas. Esta ressalva é muito importante porque muitos dos participantes nestes fóruns insistem por vezes no restart e no mudar o discurso, mas voltar ao mesmo. Portanto, nós teremos aqui a oportunidade de verificar que isso assim não é. O cloud computing é uma exigência de há muito tempo de todas as nossas empresas. As nossas empresas querem cada vez mais se concentrar no seu core business, nos seus processos de negócio e não continuarem a possuir um peso morto. E peço desculpa pela utilização da palavra. Querem cada vez mais serem capazes de se agilizar, de se ajustarem à mudança dinâmica da nossa indústria e do mercado, principalmente com um mercado tão carregado de nuvens escuras. Portanto, o cloud computing vem nesse sentido. Outras tecnologias, outros modelos de negócios já tentaram ir nessa direção, falharam. É da nosso entender que esta é a altura certa, fruto de uma integração tecnológica, fruto do conjunto de evoluções e tecnologias que atualmente estão disponíveis para todos nós. É possível aplicar este modelo, é possível ir na direção daquilo que as nossas empresas tanto necessitam. Portanto, a palavra que eu aqui deixo é where is the plug? Onde é que eu posso ligar à nuvem? E eu espero que este extraordinário painel nos ajude a compreender como é que nós vamos poder finalmente ligar à nuvem, finalmente concentrarmos nos nossos processos de negócios e finalmente lutar nesta crise que tanto nos chateia. Eu vou passar a palavra ao Afonso Buxo, CTO para a Cloud da HP, que irá fazer a apresentação.
Starting the presentation, maybe. Someone can put the presentation right. Thank you. Bom dia. É um prazer estar aqui com vocês hoje. Mas infelizmente, mas português, como podem ver, não é o suficiente bom por continuar a apresentação. So I will switch to English, unfortunately. So, cloud computing is a hot topic, it's in everyone's agenda today. And there are big supporters and strong critics around this. I can mention as an example a vice president from Forrester Research that said the natural motivation behind the push for cloud computing and described that as cloud washing, that companies are relabeling their existing products as cloud enabled, but at the end is a lot of marketing innovation on top of real innovation. So additionally, some people see cloud computing as revolutionary in the long term, but overhyped in the short term, representing more a gradual shift in our thinking about computing systems than really a sudden transformational change. And lastly, we've seen in the past, for the last decade, a lot of other different terms like application service providers, grid computing, software as a service, on-demand computing, and so on. So it's worth the effort to share another perspective, not yet another definition. So what's cloud? I know it's really sad to start with a slide that I borrow from someone else, in this case Sam Worley from Canonical Software, but I think that is the best slide I've seen around cloud computing. So it's the analogy around industrial revolution. So for a transition, you need firstly a concept. The concept of utility computing is not really new. It was introduced by John McCarthy in the first 60s, so it's more than 50 years ago. And he said that in the future, IT services will be consumed the same way that electricity were in the grid. So what this hasn't happened yet? Well, this is not enough with a concept. We need suitability. It's that the companies can consume services this way. And frankly speaking, there is a lot of examples of companies that have been doing cloud computing for the last decade without naming it this way. Salesforce or others, or newcomers like Amazon, Google, and so on. So it seems that suitability is good for the companies. Next point, technology. A lot of people from specific companies are saying, well, virtualization is the great catalyzer for cloud computing. Well, virtualization was introduced by IBM in the 70s, so it's not a new technology, and has been around in the standard market, x86, around 8 to 9 years. So technology has not been the critical path for cloud computing, and there is some cloud providers like Google that they are not using virtualization as we understand it. So what is the real change? The real change is about attitude. And what is amazing is a lot of projects in the companies around cloud are pushed by business, not by IT. And that is because they are using on their private life a lot of services from the cloud. Communications, video conferencing, streaming, media, so on. And they are asking themselves why they can use these kind of services on their companies. That was introduced by Nicholas Carr in 2003 in a really provocative article saying IT doesn't matter. I don't agree with Nicholas Carr. I think that technology is not key. It's a catalyzer or an inhibitor, but it's not a driver. But information is a driver. So all these things are making cloud computing happen now. And the main driver is exactly attitude. So the next question is, okay, this is, it seems that it's important, but when will it become a reality? And the question is not if this will be success in the market. The question is when and till what extent. Well, every time you have a question around these kind of things, there are some research firms eager to answer it. The first one was Gartner. Gartner said that by 2012, 20% of the companies will have no IT assets, focused mainly on the SMB market. There are three main reasons for driving cloud growth on the market. First one is the value proposition around cost. And as I will mention afterwards, it's not about marginal cost, it's about total cost. And moving from capital investment upfront to an operational expense that can encompass business success with IT needs. This is clearly the main driver. Secondly is time to market. The average time spent by companies to provision a new service inside the organization is from 4 to 6 months. If I have a service on the cloud provider, I can grow to twice my requirements in just a day. So this time to market is really good for growing up or shrinking down your needs. Last one is around mobility. Mobility is growing a lot with smart handheld devices. And there is a decoupling the way you are creating the service from where you are consuming the service. So you will need this kind of huge data centers able to meet this kind of demand. So there is not always green, right? There are some risks associated with cloud that people don't realize. First one is about service level. Cloud computing is growing from bottom up. So when you are an individual, you don't care a lot about service level agreements, right? For YouTube or even for Gmail. But if you are a company, this is a huge issue. So one of the risks is what is the service level agreement that your company can give you, your service providers, and what is the way to control this? This is one of the reasons because there are new incumbent players like carriers, like service operators that are growing on this space, because they can meet these kind of things on the small and medium and enterprise market. Next point is workloads. When people from business is saying, okay, cloud is our solution for everyone needs, they are not talking about technology, right? Not every workload fits these needs. The technology that is used behind is Java, .NET, whatever, but it's in a scale out fashion. So not every service can be done that way. So this is another thing we need to take into account. Next point is complexity. There are some people thinking that cloud computing is the same that the browser was for the client-server architecture. It's the last way of outsourcing, where you don't have any asset and any control about that. So in any case, when you are managing a cloud provider, you have to manage the same kind of relation that with an outsourcer. So this is another point. Network latency, well, this is technology. Locking. If you look at Gmail, there's 3 different kinds for importing your current mail system to their system. And there is no one to export from their system to another one. So the big question is, when you are moving to a service provider, what is your exit strategy? How you will move from that service provider to another one? And this is something that you need to take into account carefully. As an example, Salesforce.com, 3 years ago, they didn't have a mechanism to export your data. Regulation, this is another big point. Where your physical data resides, what is the legal aspects on this. And this is really a concern not for small companies, but for government and big companies. Security, the top one concern. So you're running cloud with other customers in the same infrastructure. So who is ensuring you that your information is confidential and is not getting any kind of leakage? And the last one is financial stability. You know what? I use pretty much Dropbox. It's an amazing storage service for an individual. Dropbox has no any assets. It's running on top of Amazon Web Services. So who is telling you that in 6 months we'll be in the same position, right? So financial stability of the current service provider is another big issue. So where is the opportunity on cloud? Let me be provocative. The yellow curve is the standardization potential. So if you look at the customer size, when you are bigger and bigger, you were mechanized a long time ago. So you have a lot of intellectual property put in place in your company, and you are less eager to embrace standard processes. On the other side, there is the average opportunity for this public offering. So if you look at this other curve in red, this is the potential opportunity. So this research that has been made by some firms like Forrester, IDC, what says that there is a self-employed micro companies in the low segment. This will be led by software as a service generic providers. A second segment is small and medium business. This will be led by new service providers, probably by the telco space. And they will use anything as a service. They are more eager to use this kind of standardization. Last one is large enterprises. These are moving down from outsourcers because they have a lot of complexity. So they are more eager about simplifying that complexity and not about the marginal cost. So this will be led by outsourcers and will be as well an opportunity for new service providers as well. So how looks a public cloud data center? When I made this presentation, and I know that Ronald from Microsoft will be there, from the legal department, I removed the references to Microsoft, but this morning he told me that I can do that, so I will do it. On the left, you have the Bing data center from Microsoft. This is like a search engine. And in the right, you have the Azure platform. If you look at that, this is really a different technology and a different landscape from private cloud. And this is what I want to bear you in mind. Private cloud is the only thing that is really common with public one is some criteria, but not the technology that is behind. In public cloud, we are really focused on cost. It's more about grid computing, so it's having thousands of nodes doing the same, and you can balance them. For instance, the Azure data center that is based on HP technology is more than 100 containers, and every container is sealed for the next 3 years, so nobody is entering them inside, right? If one node is going down, it's retired from the service. Nobody complains. It's a different approach than private one. So going back to the company, what is the challenge for the CIO? Well, it's amazing. and I try to empathize a lot with the CIOs. They have been, for the last 30 years, doing what the business asks them to do. And now the business is saying them they are really cheap and costly comparing to standard services from the cloud. So the problem is that they've been automating and industrializing the other part of the companies, and it's the part of the company that has more craftsmanship inside. So the big question is about industrialization, right? So they will look and move between a builder to provide the services to the current organization, to more as a broker, to decide what is the best way to source a given service. So they will have public services from the outside. They will transform existing services to private one, and they will build new on-premise services. So what is the enterprise needs then? Well, the enterprise needs is about managing and secure existing IT services and new services that are coming from the cloud, building services, transform existing organizations, and bursting. And this is a good topic I want to discuss, and it's one of the big opportunities. I will give you two examples, one on the good side, another one on the bad one. The good example is about New York Times. New York Times had to transform 2 terabytes of data on legacy formats to PDF for the digital archiving content. So they use Amazon for moving that data, and they made a mistake on the algorithm. So they need to run twice this batch. And the mistake was $240. That is a good example. The marginal cost of Amazon, it seems that is pretty cheap. We are talking about 10 cents a dollar per computing hour. But if you look at 8,000 hours per year, 3 years, in that period, you are buying 1 computing hour, that is like a core, and 1 gigabyte of RAM for $2,500. That's pretty expensive. But on the other side, if you have a really low average usage, less than 20%, it's really cheap. So you need to figure that at the end, companies will have static capacity inside for marginal cost, and they will spare capacity on bursting from a provider for that peak demand. So my last slide is about, as a summary, the success for companies will be in taking the wise decision on what service is the best way to source it. Maybe core services won't be inside your company. Maybe context services that you don't see any value for the business will be cheap, standards, no differentiation from your competitors, and will be bring by a public provider. Muito obrigado.
I will then call Miguel Milano from Oracle, Executive Management Team, the Oracle. Thank you, Miguel.
Hello, good morning, buenos días. My presentation, probably not that one. That's the other Miguel, the other MM. So mine is Miguel Milano, Oracle. There you go. Yes, tough times to be in Lisbon these days. I promise that the title of my presentation was sent to the organization of the event prior to the game, but it actually goes very well. Thanks for bringing down to earth, bringing our national team down to earth. Very well deserved, and congratulations. So today, we are talking about cloud. Just a show of hands, 1 second. Who is sort of an expert in IT and cloud, and who is just a business manager and would like to understand more? So expert, IT, cloud. I mean, not super experts, otherwise, we'd ask you to come here just. Okay, so that's good. That's good. I think it's a good audience where, I think people are interested in understanding what cloud may bring to bear. So I have 3 objectives in the next 10 minutes. First one is to try to bring cloud a little bit down to earth. I mean, there's a lot being said about cloud, and there is a lot of very exciting things, but also there is a lot of reality that some people maybe are missing. Second objective is, of course, I want to very briefly share with you what is our role, Oracle role in enabling clouds. And then finally, and it is very exciting, I would like to finish with some thoughts about how governments, how corporations, how small, medium enterprises, how startups can restart with cloud. So in order to describe a little bit the concept of clouds, I actually did the exercise. I went to the other source of truth, the first one being Google and Wikipedia. By the way, Google, I searched when I was invited to this conference, that was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I searched for cloud computing, and I got 61 million entries. At the time, Cristiano Ronaldo had 20 million, Mourinho 10 million. By the way, Mourinho, we are in love with him in Madrid. That shows a little bit of difference, but the incredible thing is last night, I did the search again. There were 91 million entries for cloud, so 50% more entries just in 2 weeks. So it's really cool. So now, but I would like to share now a perspective coming from YouTube. And you play the video, please.
Cloud computing can be understood as the magic behind what the phones can actually do. The cloud computing and phones here means tablets and so forth and so on. And for me, cloud computing will fundamentally be expressed not in the way that we used to talk about it, which has to do with web services and so forth, but rather in these new services that make your life just work and work in a really interesting way.
Well, we believe that cloud computing is very important. It's going to have a major impact on everything we and our customers do in the future. There are 2 important ways of looking at the cloud. One is looking at the cloud as a computing architecture, as a way of aggregating resources together to achieve much greater levels of efficiency and scalability and more flexible management. There's another way of looking at the cloud, which is as a service. In other words, the opportunity to utilize IT resources that are provided by an external vendor.
My objection to cloud computing is the fact that everyone, and this is, cloud computing is not only the future of computing, Eddie, it is the present, and the entire past of computing is all cloud. I mean, Salesforce.com has been around for more than a decade, and so is NetSuite. NetSuite's been around longer than Salesforce, and people are saying, well, that's cloud computing. Google's now cloud computing. Everyone's cloud computing. My objection to cloud computing was everyone simply looks around, like I've always been doing cloud computing. It's like 10 years ago, but cloud computing, the term's only 4 years old. But like everything is in the cloud now, and
I know.
My objection is the absurdity.
You don't like
that. No, it's not that I don't like the idea of what is. I mean, it's this nonsense. The guys say, "Oh, it's in the cloud." Well, what is that? Then you say, "Are we dead?" Oh, yeah, we're dead. If there's no hardware or software in the cloud, we are so screwed. But it's not water vapor. All it is a computer attached to a network. What are you talking about? I mean, what do you think Google runs on?
I'll ask you another.
Do they run on water vapor? I mean, cloud. They have it's databases.
How about the next question?
And operating systems and memory and microprocessors and the internet. And all of a sudden, none of that is the cloud. What are you talking about? Now, the VCs, I love the VCs. Oh, we only fund, is that cloud? Oh yeah, whoa. Microsoft Word, change internet to cloud. Mass change, give it back to these nitwits on Sand Hill Road.
So now you understand why I love working at Oracle so much. So much fun. No, but this is remarkable. I mean, 3 main actors in the cloud computing space having such a different perspective, from a very cloudy one, the magic behind what the cellular phones do, what makes your life work better, to the Mr. VMware that was a bit more techy, and he's like, IT services provided by a third party. That makes a lot of sense. But then Larry, he just really made some basic points. I think he's very aggressive. He just wanted to make the point. I think we are far beyond that, and we are much more committed and long-term looking at cloud than he shows there. But he wanted to make a point. Now, this probably, you have seen it. You don't have to read it. Don't worry. What it shows is cloud computing is at the peak of the hype curve. It's about to go into the disillusionment, disenchantment valley. There are other technologies. By the way, everything is related to cloud on that graph. Everything is related. There's cloud computing integrated as a integration service, virtualization, SaaS. And then you have other technologies that are also based on cloud that are coming. They are still not at the peak. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is cloud is a combination, and I think Alphonse said that earlier, a combination of capabilities, technologies that have existed. Now things are being put together in a different way. By the way, it doesn't mean that it's not innovation. The iPhone is a great innovation, and it's a combination of technologies that existed. Okay? Now, when I talk about cloud, I like to go to some sort of authority, and this is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And basically, they say, okay, a cloud has to have the following characteristics. It's a resource pooling group of technologies, rapid elasticity, scaling up and down, on-demand self-service, very important, measured services, so that it could be cross-charged either internally or externally, with broad network access. Now, let me build this in the interest of time. This is the typical evolution of cloud. If you go to the left to the right, from left to right, many companies today have still siloed applications with a rigid infrastructure dedicated to specific apps. They are moving, many of them, the big ones, to more virtual environments with more shared services, dynamic provisioning of those of that computing power, and more standards. Fewer companies are adding the layer on basically providing self-service to the developers and the users in the organization, and fewer have policy-based resource management so that the application scales up or down automatically without you basically having to influence, and fewer measure the use and charge back. And then there is also, the most sophisticated companies, 0.00001%. They have a real clear strategy of private clouds where they interoperate their applications and they burst out from the private cloud to the public cloud. So this is a reality. It's a very exciting journey, but it's a journey, and we are still not very far away. Now, we do support the cloud, and again, Larry is just a funny guy, and he likes to make points. But we have a clear strategy. We want to make sure that cloud is enterprise grade ready. So basically that is fully scalable, reliable, security, all the ETs. And also we do support private and public clouds. Let me just explain briefly. Let me build a slide. Private PaaS, as I explained earlier, we do provide technology for corporations to build the private PaaS so that users can go to an employee portal, log in, request a virtual machine with a specific amount of memory, disk space, CPU characteristics, and depending on the type of the employee, he or she will have the rights or not, and then they could enter into that virtual environment. They could go into a catalog of components, services, and start building the applications. I mean, that exists, technology components exist. Oracle is a provider of those components and is uniquely positioned in the sense that we are probably the only company in the world that have all the stack from the disk to the applications after the acquisition of Sun Microsystems. We do provide technology. We allow customers to deploy Oracle technology on the cloud. You can go to the Amazon cloud and basically download a virtual machine image for WebLogic Server or for any other components of Oracle, and you can run it. By the way, you can even use your licenses in the Amazon cloud, which is something that people don't know too much. On the application side, we do provide applications that run as a service inside a customer, or we also provide typical, Salesforce.com type CRM on demand. We're going to launch at Christmas the Open Office to compete with Google and Microsoft. So we do have a very complete strategy on the cloud. And then just to finish, I wanted to leave with you some thoughts on how governments, corporations, small, medium enterprises, and startups can really restart with cloud. I'm a firm believer that cloud is bringing tremendous opportunities, and some of them were mentioned earlier for a corporation level. But take, for instance, government. I mean, they have such a large scale, the economy of scale. You guys, I mean, governments need to get it together, organize, appoint an institution that will run a centralized infrastructure as a service and a platform as a service, call it GovCloud, and all the government infrastructure should be run out of that cloud. Then they should put in that cloud all the services, components, processes that they have developed. They just put it there so that other institutions can use it, and other institutions can build services on those components. And then, of course, it would be very easy out of that pass to deploy services in a SaaS model for the citizens. For corporate and small medium enterprises, we said it a lot. Corporations have to have the right strategy, the right mix between private clouds and public clouds. And there is a bursting word that it's used so that you can run core applications in your private cloud, and then if they really need more capacity, they can use for some minutes in the year power from the computing power from a public cloud. By the way, corporations should use public clouds for any SaaS that is non-core app, like email, for instance. Then they should build a shared service catalog, the same thing as I mentioned for the government, where they put all the components so that users and developers can easily go there, get components, run applications, build new applications based on those components. All test and development and innovation should be done in the cloud. Why buy specific infrastructure for a temporary project? And of course, SMEs, they should do everything in the cloud. And I'm running out of time, so last comment. Startups, very exciting time for startups. First of all, forget about buying servers, etc. Go to the cloud, have all the infrastructure in the cloud, that's obvious. But very importantly, this is the second bullet point is an important nuance. There is a huge business that will emerge. The same way that with the App Store, people can just put the applications in the cloud and then they get downloaded and get paid. There will be a possibility for startups to build some processes, components, put it in the public clouds, in the main public clouds. Oracle has a public cloud. We also work with Amazon that has one of the biggest public clouds. You have them there, and other developers in the world will use those components to build better applications, and you will get paid for it. So it's a great opportunity. And also, when they are building their own applications to provide services to their customers, they should go build them on the cloud, use components from other startups or from other companies, and of course deploy the application in the cloud. So great amount of opportunities, and hopefully we'll see more from the other speakers. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Sorry. Miguel, I was planning my initial thoughts using the Larry Ellison video, but I was sure that you were planning also to use it. I will talk more about that in the end of the session. I will now call Miguel Moreira, CEO da PT Sistemas de Informação. Thank you.
Bom dia. Bom dia a todos. Eu nesta apresentação vou falar sobre uma perspectiva talvez um pouco diferente, que tem a ver com a perspectiva de um operador de telecomunicações. Porque é que nós, Portugal Telecom, na perspectiva de um operador, porque é que estamos neste mundo do cloud, porque é que para nós é uma aposta tão forte, explicar um pouco o racional desse pensamento. Eu começaria por dar algum background e que, desde alguns anos, com a convergência das redes, um operador passou a ter um enfoque não por fábrica, não por serviço móvel, por serviço fixo, mas muito mais por segmentos de clientes. E esse enfoque em segmentos de clientes permitiu-nos fazer agregações de serviços, como por exemplo nos móveis, segmento pessoal para nós, podemos oferecer telecomunicações, mas dados também, gaming, música, etc. Ou por exemplo no segmento das PMEs, hoje em dia, para além das telecomunicações fixas ou móveis e dados, acrescentamos, por exemplo, todas as ferramentas para gestão de posto de trabalho, como por exemplo o produto que nós temos, que é o Office Box, que de alguma maneira já demonstra que nós evoluímos numa base de monosserviço para uma base de agregações de serviços para segmentos de clientes, dentro dessas componentes de serviços já com componentes de tecnologia, não só telecomunicações. Eu diria que, e não me alongando sobre o que está por detrás do aparecimento do modelo da cloud, obviamente aspectos contextuais, económicos, a necessidade de termos acesso a mais tecnologia com menos investimento, obviamente questões também da convergência de equipamentos e de hoje em dia podermos aceder em multi-device, que nos dá realmente a possibilidade de ter novos modelos de negócio. Nós pensamos que o principal elemento diferenciador é realmente a alta conectividade que hoje em dia existe. O investimento que tem sido feito pelos diversos operadores em todo o mundo, no sentido de, nas redes fixas ou nas redes móveis, poder garantir conectividade de alta capacidade, de alta velocidade e com alta disponibilidade, numa filosofia de serviço, talvez seja o fator que, ao fim e ao cabo, multiplica o potencial da cloud mais do que talvez há 5 ou 6 ou 7 anos, quando efetivamente já se desenhava esses modelos de negócio, mas provavelmente não havia infraestrutura para suportar uma aposta séria por parte da base empresarial. Na perspectiva de um operador, eu diria que nós vemos essencialmente 5 grandes fatores que nos levam a pensar que um operador pode ter uma aposta forte a nível do cloud. Uma delas, eu já referi anteriormente, tem a ver com a aposta nas redes. Os investimentos que os operadores têm feito, neste caso em concreto a Portugal Telecom, nesta geografia, em redes de alto débito, tanto na parte móvel como na parte fixa, infraestruturas de data centers, a base comercial instalada, a capacidade e o know-how de tecnologia que nós já temos e, de alguma maneira, uma estratégia de parcerias. Entrando mais em detalhe, a nível das redes é conhecida a aposta e o investimento que tem sido feito por muitos operadores, neste caso nós próprios. Para terem uma ideia, versus a média mundial, a Portugal Telecom talvez invista em CAPEX 2 vezes aquilo que um operador investe em termos de infraestrutura. É evidente que isto tem-nos gerado uma base de ativos que não só necessita de ser rentabilizada, como dá um potencial de negócio para nós e outros operadores de explorarem numa base muito mais agressiva em termos de serviços. Portanto, as redes e a tecnologia instalada é um asset que nós consideramos muito importante nesta oferta. Um segundo tem a ver com infraestrutura, mas esta infraestrutura de computação. Os operadores no mundo inteiro, uma boa parte deles, têm feito investimentos fortes nas infraestruturas de data center. A Portugal Telecom, em concreto, neste momento tem a maior capacidade em Portugal e tem planos para alargar, num sentido de se dotar de uma capacidade computacional para terceiros, para alojar terceiros e para montar serviços que cumpram, ao fim e ao cabo, parte das grandes preocupações que existem hoje em dia, nomeadamente de segurança ou de serem, digamos, energy compliant, obviamente porque os data centers são altos consumidores de energia, mas o ativo data center é algo que nos parece também ser muito importante numa oferta. Um terceiro aspecto, eu não tenho slide para isto, tem a ver com o modelo de negócio. O modelo dos operadores de telecomunicações assenta numa grande presença no mundo empresarial, quer das PMEs, quer do residencial e do pessoal, e também nas grandes empresas. Quando eu digo uma grande proximidade à base de clientes, significa ter uma estrutura comercial alargada, ter uma base normalmente contratualizada com esses clientes ter também uma filosofia de serviço, saber que grande parte dos nossos serviços funcionam numa base de 24/7 e o cliente sabe se algo está errado, pode ligar para um número e terá certamente um apoio. Portanto, é muito uma filosofia parecida à filosofia on-demand que está por detrás dos serviços do cloud. Portanto, o tema comercial e da filosofia de serviço é algo que nos parece muito importante. Um quarto elemento tem a ver com tecnologias e a capacidade de fazer deployment de serviços de tecnologia. Hoje em dia, e um pouco no seguimento do que eu tinha dito atrás, quando nós migramos de serviços de telecomunicações puros para serviços de tecnologia, tivemos que desenvolver capacidades nessa base. Portanto, hoje em dia, oferecer produtos como Office Box ou de ter outsourcing de tecnologia, quer de gestão de redes, quer de data center, quer também de algumas aplicações já para o mundo empresarial, obrigou estes operadores, neste caso concreto nós, a desenvolvermos capacidades e, por exemplo, para terem uma ideia, Portugal Telecom tem mais de 3.000 profissionais na área de tecnologia que funcionam para a tecnologia interna da PT, mas também, obviamente, muito para clientes com uma grande taxa de crescimento. Para terem uma ideia, no mercado empresarial, mais de 20% da nossa receita já não é receita de telecomunicações, é receita, sim, de tecnologia. Portanto, capacidades que existem. E um quinto fator que tem a ver com parcerias. Este é um aspecto também muito importante, porque o objetivo não é, obviamente, reinventar a roda, por exemplo, a nível das ofertas, tanto a nível de infraestrutura, a nível de plataformas ou a nível de software. Nós temos feito um conjunto de alianças estratégicas com vários players mundiais que veem no operador uma forma de chegar ao mercado rápida e com uma proposta de valor muito válida. Portanto, eu concluía dizendo que nós, operadores, achamos que temos um papel forte e uma aposta forte a jogar. Para nós é muito importante este mercado por alguns motivos que eu volto a relembrar. O primeiro é que é uma forma de crescermos também em mercados que estão já com grandes penetrações a nível das telecomunicações, de crescermos receita e de nos permitir fazer uma gestão de clientes, digamos, mais completa. Um segundo elemento tem a ver com a rentabilização dos nossos ativos. Os investimentos que temos feito, tanto a nível de data center como principalmente a nível de infraestruturas de telecomunicações, têm que ter aplicações, têm que ter serviços em cima delas para poderem ser rentabilizadas. Logo, a rentabilização dos ativos que nós temos montados é um aspecto importante. O terceiro aspecto e último é que nós acreditamos que um operador, se calhar e curiosamente, e se calhar até inesperadamente, talvez seja aquele que consegue apresentar uma oferta mais completa end-to-end, desde que tenha, a nível do hardware e a nível do software, as parcerias adequadas, podendo oferecer uma oferta que tem alojamento, que tem infraestrutura, que tem conectividade e que tem aplicações e serviços. Portanto, esta é um pouco a perspectiva de porque é que um operador, neste caso a minha empresa, a Portugal Telecom, ambiciona ser um parceiro forte neste mundo do cloud computing. Muito obrigado.
I will call now Renato Recio from IBM. He is a distinguished engineer and IBM Data Center Networking CTO.
Can I use this microphone? Is that okay? Very good. So what I'm going to talk about today is not just cloud computing and what that impact has on business, but the transformation that that's causing to businesses and the opportunities for companies like Zon Multimedia and telecom companies, Orange is another example, to leverage their IT. These companies have IT. They've had IT for a very long time. And you can use that IT and you can use that infrastructure to service not just the company's users, business users, but also to service SMB and make those services available publicly. If you go to the next slide, please. So from our view, and this was covered by some of the other speakers, there's a spectrum of cloud usage models. On one end of the spectrum is take the IT infrastructure that's there today and enable service catalogs, enable service provisioning, enable service automation, put a service management infrastructure above it. To get there, there's some steps that you need to go through, but put that infrastructure in place and use it as a private cloud. You can take that private cloud, and we've worked with some Wall Street clients to take that private cloud and also use it as a hybrid cloud, where in burst, as was given by HP as an example, you can take some of the transactions during peak periods and move those transactions, for example, into an IBM cloud in the case of the Wall Street client. From our vantage point, when you look at which workloads are applicable for a cloud environment, we believe that you need to look at the workload characteristics. We believe workload characteristics like the security of the workload, how secure is the web provider, the cloud provider that you're going to be using, how secure is their infrastructure. It needs to also be standardized, and we'll talk about that more in the slides to come. If you look at, we've looked at the kinds of workloads that are more suitable for a private cloud type of an environment, and those are workloads like transaction workloads, database workloads, data warehousing workloads, where security is a major issue. Latency, performance is another major issue. And then at the other end of the spectrum, infrastructure workloads like, for example, email, or help desk, or conferencing, collaboration type workloads. A storage type workload is the ones that we believe are more suitable for a public cloud type of environment. For IT, and this slide is meant for IT, we believe that our view is if you start with a consolidation, you consolidate all of the servers, consolidate the infrastructure, you take the next step, which is virtualize that infrastructure. And to virtualize that infrastructure, you need to, from our vantage point, you need to look at technologies that are going to automate the management of that infrastructure. Not just the management of virtual machines. That's one step. And not just the management of the underlying network and the storage. That also needs to be automated. But the management of the services that are going to be made available as workloads on those virtual machines. And as you do that step, you move into this standardized and automated service environment that is characterized as a cloud computing model. In that environment, we believe a standards-based infrastructure is key so that you're not locked in to a single vendor. We believe we are driving standards to enable that. We're driving those standards at each level of the ecosystem. If you look at this next slide, we're driving it at the software as a service, platform as a service, at the services layer. We're driving it in the middle, in the management layer, through management standards like the DMTF, and we're driving it in the virtualization infrastructure through standards like IEEE for the networking, IETF for the networking. This is the cloud platform model that we use to describe cloud to clients. One observation we've seen that Larry video before, and one observation is, if you look at the IT infrastructure, Larry's got a good point. Yeah, it's using computers, and it's using storage, and it's using a network. Okay. And it's using applications. Okay. So no change. It's the same stuff. We believe there is a change, and the change is a business transformation. It enables a business transformation. It enables a model where you're leveraging infrastructure that's not in your site, that is not in part of your site, and that enables new business models. It enables, for example, telecom companies, as I mentioned earlier, to leverage their infrastructure, to leverage their IT, and make that IT available to SMB. Why does that matter? Well, because that IT is likely highly available. It's likely enterprise class. Those kinds of enterprises are much larger, the telecoms, are much larger enterprises, and if they use that IT infrastructure for SMBs, SMBs can leverage that infrastructure and get those kinds of services through the infrastructure. What I'm going to focus on, because this is Restart, and it's not about, it's more focused on Portugal, what I'm going to focus on is the two middle layers that you see here in 3 minutes. So, from our view, in that middle layer, the cloud service layer, the functionality that needs to be provided in that layer is a service management capability that lets you create a service catalog, lets a user self-provision, self-service a service from that catalog. They may modify it, it may be based on a template, they may modify that service. And as a cloud provider, you need to be able to charge them for it. So you need to be able to have the infrastructure to charge them for that service, do the budgeting, do the metering. You also need to be able to prove to them that the service level agreements that the client purchased, he's getting. So you need a monitoring capability to be able to monitor the service and be able to show, yes, you're getting the SLA level that you had expected. And this needs to be secure. It needs to be over a secure infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of the major issues. So this is at the cloud platform level. If we go beneath that and we look at the infrastructure level, from our vantage point, there's several pieces to that. There's the virtual machines themselves, the hypervisor. So it's the operating system, the workload, the operating system, the hypervisor. And our view on that layer is to provide, as I mentioned earlier, a standards-based approach to that infrastructure, so that you're not locked in if you are a telco, for example, or if you are an IT provider and you want to use an IT customer, a financial institution, for instance, a government institution, for instance, that you're not locked in to an infrastructure for the next 5 years. That you have choice in the servers, you have choice, you've got to have choice. I have to have choice for HP. I got to be able to interoperate with HP. And so at IBM, I personally work very closely with my friends at HP, who I've been working with for over a decade. Mike Krause, Dwight Barron, Paul Cogman. These are fellows and VPs at HP. Do the same thing with EMC. And what we focus on, with several other companies, I can mention Cisco, Sylvano Guides, several other companies, what we focus on is to try and have a standards-based ecosystem so that you can have, if you want, a primary provider for that infrastructure and a secondary provider for the infrastructure. And you can keep those two providers competitive. You can use one and say, hey, I'm getting a better deal from HP. You need to give me either a better service, faster response time, et cetera, or lower cost. And likewise, to turn around and say to HP, I'm getting a much better deal from IBM. They got all this service management stuff. Where's your service management? Where's the infrastructure that you can provide for this? At the hardware level, we have. I'll give you some examples here of innovations that we've made in the hardware infrastructure for the Intel platform. One of the major innovations that we made this year in that infrastructure is to separate memory from the server, so that if you want to have more memory on your server, you can add that on, whether it's a blade platform or it's a rack-optimized platform. I don't know if any of the other vendors have that capability today, but that's one area. The other area is around this networking innovation. All right, I'm running out of time. I'm actually out of time, so I'm going to go very quickly. This is an example. I mean, you can make a very long table, make it into a spreadsheet with I don't know how many columns of standards that are important in this ecosystem. At the software as a service level, platform as a service level, at the service management level, and at the infrastructure level. And what we're trying to show in this table is some of those standards from each of those levels and where they apply: network, security, management. These are some examples of companies that we have helped with cloud and what they have said of the solutions that we provided in that infrastructure. One example is reducing the IT labor cost by 50%. In terms of the way that you manage the IT, the way that you configure a service, you provision the service, you manage the service over the service's lifetime. Improved capital utilization by taking advantage of virtualization and increasing the number of virtual machines per socket that you have in the server to get a much higher overall utilization of your assets. Improved quality, reduced end user costs. You can go through the rest of these, and in the backups we have some more examples of this. And I'll cover in this slide a summation of the results that some of these clients are seeing. I'll pick one example out of this list. You can read through the entire list. And that example is workload automation and mobility. For an IT, so for a financial institution, a government institution, a telco, if you want to make the most out of your assets, you want to make the most out of the hardware, the software, you need to be able to not just have virtualization and enable virtualization on a single server. You need to be able to leverage all of that infrastructure and move those virtual machines with all the state that's associated with those virtual machines very quickly, so that if you've got a very utilized server at 90% and is sitting next to servers that at 20%, you can move that service from server, the overutilized server to the underutilized servers. You can do that today with VMware. You can do that today with Power VM. But what we're working on is the issue that we have today with that kind of solution is all of the network state that's associated with those virtual machines doesn't move a priori with the virtual machine. It doesn't move ahead of it. So we're working with our partners, with Juniper, with Cisco, with Brocade. We're working on a standards-based approach to that. And you're going to be seeing in 2011, I expect, a trend, words I can use, solutions that provide that capability. And what that lets you do is move all that infrastructure that's associated with the virtual machine automatically, so that you don't have to wait hours to move a service. You can do it in seconds. There's other examples that you can read through in this, in this page of what our clients are saying. And then I'm from IBM, so I've got to sort of finish with a why IBM, okay? So from our vantage point, we're globally relevant. We have this infrastructure from the top to the bottom. And for government, financial institutions, et cetera, we can provide that infrastructure at the various levels so that you can leverage the elements that you want from IBM and use another party, if you wish, for the elements that you want to leverage another partner. Again, our stress point here is focus on, for this cloud environment, focus on standards and focus on security. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you.
Now I will call. You can use the other one. Yeah, you can use that. Use the other.
That's right. I'd like to work on it too. Okay. An opportune time to lose my microphone.
Okay.
This goes.
Okay.
Okay. Sure. Help me put that on.
And hardware problem.
She's got. Does she know which one to load? Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here in Lisbon. I got to say, I live in Paris. I'm enjoying the weather for what I've seen of it. I thought I'd pick up on some of the themes you've already heard today on cloud in particular, but also segue a little bit into some of the regulatory aspects of cloud computing, because I think it's important to think about that relative to what governments are planning to do, what corporate citizens are planning to do. If you think about cloud computing and regulation, there's been a lot of talk about public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, government cloud. It gets a little confusing sometimes, but I thought I'd share a couple notes on where this is and where it might be going. And one aspect of the public cloud that we like, and I think everyone here would agree, is the environmental savings, the cost savings you can have with a public cloud. And I think I heard a quote on these big data centers that Microsoft and others have developed. About 30% of the energy, 30% of the cost of running those data centers is the energy required to make them run. And so it's a big number, about a third. And we looked at, where should data centers be located, and us and IBM and others have thought about this. And, we put one of our data centers in Dublin. And it turns out in Dublin, if you think about, whether you have to cool a data center or heat it to keep the temperature at an appropriate range, it's about 5 days we're either turning the air conditioning on or turning the heat on. So you can see that's a huge environmental savings and cost savings for companies running data centers. The other thing that's interesting that you've already heard about is there are studies that show about the underutilization of servers is about 90%. So about 10% of the servers are fully utilized, and beyond that, there's more room for them to work. And so this, again, with virtualization stuff, cloud can help people use servers. Microsoft did a study with Accenture and WPP looking at some of our Exchange Online processes and found out that big companies can save about 30% over the current systems, and small companies up to 90% savings moving to Exchange Online. So big savings opportunities. I thought I'd talk about 3 new things that when we think about cloud, people are saying, what is it? It's hard to communicate sometimes. There's a couple things that I thought are interesting when it comes to citizens providing data through the cloud. One is called Eye on Earth. And Eye on Earth enables people to upload water and air quality to the cloud so other people can see how their communities are performing and whether they should go out that day or not if you have a person with asthma, for instance. So there's 500 million citizens in Europe, 32 countries, and through Eye on Earth, people are uploading this data in real time. You can see what the air quality is like. Another interesting one I found was it's called Love Clean Streets. And this is an application in London where citizens can upload graffiti and illegal dumping data to Bing Maps. And so when they do this, the governments can see, where is the graffiti, where's the dumping, and there's a 30% now reduction in graffiti-related complaints, and they're about 70 to 80% faster in cleaning these things up all through the cloud. The third one I'd like to mention is, I think, a huge Portugal success story, and that's around the Magellan product, where 500 million students have gotten cloud-enabled laptops, 1 laptop per child. And I got to say, this is just phenomenal where this is going now. Many countries are looking at the pilot created here in Portugal and saying, should we do this and how would it be enabled? So I think it's a huge success story. And finally, just on the slide, I didn't want to go through our products. It would take quite a lot of time. But I will note that our partners are a big part of our success. And in Europe, we have about 150,000 companies we work with that employ 2 million people. And in Portugal, there's 2,000 companies we work with, and they employ on approximately 20,000 people. So the ecosystem, if you will, the partners that we work with are a real big part of our success. One differentiator maybe Microsoft has over some of the other cloud providers is we have this idea of you can do hybrid solutions. And this is one on the slide with Starbucks, where Starbucks wants to keep a lot of their data on-premise for security and privacy reasons, but they also want to enable their 18,000 branches to hook into this system. And so this just shows you how they're able to both use on-premise and cloud computing to pull everything together. So if I segue from that into the regulatory and policy implications, we've been thinking about this for quite some time. And in fact, my general counsel, Brad Smith, came to Brussels in January to talk about, what impacts does this have for government officials? How should we think about the regulation? And it was an interesting reception that he received because there were some notes that said, wow, Microsoft wants to be regulated. I thought, well, it's a bit true. I mean, it's a regulated space already. There are a lot of different elements to this. And in some ways, I think you could look at it as things haven't changed that much. It's just that the cloud has exacerbated how people think about these policy and regulatory implications. So I thought I'd run through just a few of them, and you'll see when you're thinking about private and public and government clouds, each of these has a little different flavor when it comes to what should the governments do. And one thing Microsoft has said is we have to be responsible in how we think about this. We can't just jump forward, and so that's some of the theme you'll see on my discussion. So when you think about quite interesting, and I'll just read it to you. Anything that has your name, address, social security number, or driver's license, we can't put that in a cloud for privacy reasons. I hate to be the bureaucratic stick in the mud. We have a responsibility to the public trust that's on a different level than the private sector. This is a CIO from California Public Utilities. So if that's the prevailing view, and if it's a necessary view, then that changes the dynamic of how companies should think about cloud and how regulators should think about cloud. And you will have more of a private clouds, maybe in each member state of the European Union, all 27 member states. You won't have some of the environmental and cost savings where you could put this in a larger data center. But I think in some ways that's life, and I think companies are coming to grips with that and trying to decide what's the balance between private and public and government and how should you best do that. And I just wanted to note that one of the biggest policy issues is privacy. And the European data protection regime stems from 1995, and just recently that has been reopened, and they're doing a communication and consultation process around this now, where they're looking at what should the privacy regime be, and online cloud computing will have a big element to that. One that I think is kind of interesting is and I'm not sure where this is going to go, but they're proposing a so-called right to be forgotten, which is if you're in a social networking site and you decide you want to no longer participate, can you pull your data back out? And it's very interesting to think about what this means. I mean, there's technical implications as things replicate across the web. Is it even available to be pulled out? It might depend on what privacy settings you decided to enact in the first place. But that's an example of things that are going on. Can I be forgotten? Should I choose to? There's also just a whole host of rules if you're trying to operate across the EU 27 of, can you do that? How does data move back and forth? What's the retention policies and such like that? And finally, another one on this is this right of action for security. Do you have to notify for a breach and things like that? We think there should be some big responsibilities on cloud service providers to go ahead and inform clients and their customers what their policies are and how they plan to do security. Data export and portability is another big one. I think you heard lock-in 3 or 4 times from my colleague from IBM. Microsoft agrees you should be able to move your data around different cloud offerings. And so this is part of the debate in Brussels. And what does it really mean? How do you do that? Whose data is it? We think it's your data, but how do you move that between systems? So there's a lot of discussion going on now about how would you do that. And again, will this idea of storing data nationally stick, or will there be ability to move to a more holistic, broader cloud offering? Will depend upon how the governments continue to think about this. Jurisdiction and choice of law is another interesting question. A lot of the things around cloud computing and what people are doing relate to who has access from a governmental standpoint. And, the EU has a regime that talks about enabling Interpol and others to access this data under appropriate circumstances. The U.S. has another view, other countries as well. And I think you're going to see a lot of debate now on trade negotiations, EU, U.S., China, EU, China, on what should the mechanisms be. And there's lots of press, of course, around this on companies operating in different countries and what obligations they have. Intellectual property is another element. In some ways, the cloud might make intellectual property easier. I mentioned the Starbucks example. One of the things that Starbucks liked about the hybrid approach I showed you was that they can keep their intellectual property on their on-premise servers and yet allow access to it through all these branches. And so there's a bit more control over what that means using our SharePoint technology. So their intellectual property is actually helpful. In other ways, it might be more difficult. And the query here are going to be people rely more on trade secrets than they have before in some of the cloud offerings they're doing. When you think of, products as a service as opposed to something more tangible that used to be able to buy or sell. And then interoperability is another, I think, huge issue when it comes to cloud computing. If these systems are going to all work together, what is the role of standards in this, and how do people interoperate and at what level? And I think we have some lessons to look through from the IT perspective on the industry where this really tends to work out if people can just talk about what they want to accomplish. And so I'm optimistic, I think, that interoperability is going to play a big role. And just a note on the Venus C project is one where Microsoft has donated cloud computing services to the European Union to work on interoperable systems to make cloud computing better to work together. And then finally, there's infrastructure issues. This relates to the European Union's digital agenda, but how do you bring people online, and how do you have the broadband ability to go ahead and enable people to participate in the cloud computing, because it does require more and more bandwidth. The internet itself is expanding how much bandwidth you need, but cloud computing is, again, putting a spotlight on what's available and how, so where could we go? Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you.
That was Ronald Ding, Chief Operation Officer from Microsoft. We have a great opportunity to hear from companies, from providers. Now we will have a very important opportunity to access to what customers are already doing in this area and how customers are already obtaining benefits from cloud computing. We will start from Hans Peter from Federal Special Data Infrastructure, Office of Topology, Swiss Top. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity here to present Swisstopo's cloud solution that is already implemented and productively running. First, very quickly, I'd like to introduce our office. We are a federal office within the Swiss public administration. We have 300 employees, are part of the Federal Department of Defense, Civil Protection and Sport. And maybe you have heard we are very famous for our detailed and very nice-looking national maps of Switzerland. But why I'm here is not because of that. It's because in several years we have started to build a so-called federal spatial geodata infrastructure. And what is very special about this is that a huge part of this federal data infrastructure is running in the public cloud of Amazon. That means from 55 servers we are currently running, 45 are running in the Amazon cloud. From around 50 servers and services, mostly in the spatial area, that means we provide mapping application, mapping services. The most prominent example is GeoAdmin.ch. That's the geoportal of the Swiss Confederation. It's an important part within the Swiss e-government. As you may have known, 80% of all political decisions are based on geoinformation and spatial data. What is special about this is also from an operational point of view is that this data is quite heavy and data intensive. The Swiss, this GeoPortal is dedicated not only to the public authorities, but also to the private sector and mainly to citizens. Here you have just a print shot. Within this application, you can now visualize around 60 data sets of public entities who were gathered due to law, and we spread now this information to our citizens. Here you can have a look at historical data, at aerial images, as you have here, topographical maps, and so on and so on. And one lesson learned that I can already present you here is that we have failed with our go live, most probably, if we wouldn't have had our application in the cloud. We had a big media campaign in August 2010, where the load on this application was multiplied by a factor 100. We transferred, and Switzerland is quite a small country, 1 terabyte per day to the internet. And also the strategic unit of the Swiss Confederation told that with our infrastructure we have currently available, this wouldn't have been possible to achieve. So how do you come to such a point that you have already a cloud running? So we don't have in Switzerland a Gov cloud. We don't have any cloud at all in the federal sector available. So you see, it was a really bottom-up approach that we are now using Amazon Web Services. I think very important is, that's the mission of the technical stuff where I'm a part of, is to first get cloud literate. You really need to understand the different concepts. And you need to convince the managing board of the benefits of these cloud services. But how you do that? You have to get some practice. You need a specific cloud project. And often this is quite difficult to achieve because cloud is a lot of security concerns, legal issues that are not solved. So the project managers have to go actively and propose possible cloud projects. They can be small, but it's important that as quick as possible, the technical staff can really get in touch with these new technologies. When you start such a project, you have to convince the board that you won't be vendor locked in. That's maybe not such an easy task, but I'll show you that it's possible. And you should have a plan B in your pocket, because this market is so volatile, it's changing every week, every day. You should have an alternative in the pocket if you fail with your cloud project. Then, we always talk from the cloud. I think it's very important to understand that there are very different cloud service delivery models, and you need to choose the right one that suits best your business needs. Swiss Topo chose infrastructure as a service. Why? Because Swiss Topo is a provider of geospatial applications and services. And that's our core business. So, software as a service and platform as a service wasn't the solution for us because we had too few control about what's happening. Infrastructure as a service, as you see in green, exactly give us the control where we need it. That means on our applications and services. And we can focus on this and don't need to fiddle around anymore with hardware infrastructure. And this really boosts the performance up of your stuff. Yeah, and then when you have once a small project running, you have to go and convince not only your internal, but also your external customers of the benefits. of the cloud services. And that it can be done even without having a cloud strategy is showing this slide here. In our federal spatial geodata infrastructure, we operate services for other governmental entities, even in other departments. But within the last 2 years, we arrived to convince 27 of 30 services to be migrated, to be run in the public cloud of Amazon. Only 3 having military data in it and having data for the police in it, we couldn't migrate till now. And very, very important is also the services that you migrate have to be, let's say, cloud-enabled. And the huge possibilities you have with scaling up and down also needs that you automate your cloud assets. Because all people then expect that you can roll out 10 servers in 1 hour and abandon them again very quickly. You will be in a mess if you don't already in the beginning automate these assets. And what we didn't speak about yet in the whole session is also the role of open standards and open source. To scale, you don't need only the hardware to scale, you also need the software to scale. And here, it was really a big benefit that we always followed a very solid and almost fundamental open source strategy. And this pays out now. We don't need to think about any licenses. We can roll out 10 servers, install them, and no problems with licenses. Here, a last slide, the architecture we implemented. And this shows that it is possible to handle now the testing environments, integration and production environments in totally different zones. With one tool, we call it Puppet, that is rolling out and controlling the virtual servers in the cloud. And so we already prove that it is possible to run such services without being vendor locked in. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now ask José Vera from Tranquilidade Seguros to show us how Tranquilidade is already on the cloud. But our aim in putting in the same table the customers and providers was to start the discussion and start the questions. So I will start a customer. I will start with a question to the customers. And my question is about risk management. Our CIO is willing to support the risks and the costs of moving to the cloud, especially when he has to face the board of the organization. Because as we have already noticed, there are still a lot of doubts, a lot of fears in cloud computing related to security, related to uniformization, and so on. So there are risks. And usually companies are passing the risk management to the providers. Okay, you solve all the risks, I only all the services. I know that Tranquilidade is not doing that, and I will love to hear from you, José. Thank you.
Antes de mais, boa tarde. Eu sei que são já 1h, já deve estar toda a gente cheia de fome, portanto eu vou tentar ser o mais curtinho possível e depois responder ali à pergunta do Paulo. E deixem começar por vos pedir desculpa porque eu não tenho mesmo jeito nenhum para estas coisas, portanto isto vai mesmo ser muito depressinha. Antes de mais, eu acho que toda a gente deve conhecer a Tranquilidade. Se não conhece, é uma companhia de seguros já com algum tempo, tem 135 anos, portanto é uma companhia, é quase uma startup ágil, que, enfim, que começou no Porto, que lhe aconteceu aqui as vicissitudes, as alegrias e as desgraças que aconteceram a todos nós durante este século e qualquer coisa, e que presentemente, desde que foi desnacionalizada, faz parte do Grupo Espírito Santo. É a maior empresa de seguros não vida em Portugal de capitais privados, portugueses, e, portanto, tem todas as condições para ser uma companhia muito ágil e muito proativa neste tipo de coisas. Portanto, como é que nós aqui viemos ter? Em 2005, a companhia, depois de um um longo pensamento estratégico, afinou a sua estratégia para a próxima década, considerando que era vital duas coisas. Primeiro, aumentar bastante o footprint que tinha em Portugal, lançando novas linhas de negócio, nomeadamente dedicando-se às diretas, dedicando-se à vida, que eram áreas que normalmente não faziam parte do DNA da companhia, e decidiu que a internacionalização era um passo importantíssimo, aliás, no sentido que o Banco Espírito Santo fez e que tem neste momento já 30 e qualquer coisa operações fora de Portugal. Para fazer isto, os sistemas de informação foram chamados a suportar de duas maneiras. Por um lado, deixando de ser um peso. Para ter uma ideia, a companhia, enquanto companhia, sozinha, em 2000, teve uma despesa com os seus sistemas de informação de 19,4 milhões de euros e, por outro lado, não só deixar de ser despesa, como passar a ser um promotor desta mudança. E, portanto, nós começámos aos poucos, depois de passar o pânico, começámos a olhar para o que tínhamos, para o sistema de informação e a começar a fazer o trabalho de casa. Foi dividir, olhar para a confusão e começar a standardizar a arquitetura, simplificá-la, standardizá-la, simplificá-la, dividindo a panóplia de sistemas que compõem uma companhia de seguros em Portugal, que é provavelmente o setor mais regulado e com mais peso regulatório, de uma forma que nos permitisse perceber aquilo que era o DNA da companhia, aquilo que estava inscrito nos sistemas de informação e que fazia com que a companhia fosse única, e aquilo que eram commodities. Sendo que as commodities, tal como para nós não faz sentido termos um sistema de geração elétrica a funcionar porque achamos que a EDP nos presta um bom serviço, ou ter um furo artesiano para fornecer água porque achamos que a EPAL nos presta um bom serviço, essas commodities teriam que seguir o mesmo caminho. E foi nesse sentido que, assim que começámos a ver alguma luz ao fundo do túnel e a dividir e a retirar complexidade, standardizando, por exemplo, na infraestrutura os servidores, acabando com a utilização de algumas tecnologias que nos limitavam a capacidade para movimentarmos. Fizemos o primeiro grande move, que foi mudar o data center, acabar com o data center, deixámos de ter, passámos a contratar esse serviço à Portugal Telecom e por essa porta saíram muitas outras coisas. Saiu o sistema de correio eletrónico, saiu as ferramentas de produtividade, saiu o CRM. Isto para quê? Para nos podermos concentrar naquilo que é o core da companhia, naquilo que torna a companhia única e que lhe dá a sua vantagem competitiva e deixarmos de estar a gastar recursos e a gastar tempo e a gastar attention span com coisas que, na prática, não nos distinguem de coisa nenhuma. O sistema de correio eletrónico é tão bom desde que funcione. O sistema o data center é fantástico desde que não se apague o ar-condicionado, que não fique sem eletricidade e que a conectividade seja boa. E, portanto, não é um assunto com o qual eu, de manhã, quando chego à companhia, queira estar preocupado. Não é um problema que eu queira ter. E não é um problema que eu queira que as pessoas que connosco trabalham tenham. E, portanto, saiu. Neste sentido, enfim, para além do hype todo que os marketings dos fornecedores que aqui me acompanham conseguem produzir à volta disto, em cada uma destas situações nós fomos à procura de quem é que no mercado conseguiria fornecer os serviços que nós queríamos comprar da forma mais económica, que se aproximasse mais daquilo que era o nosso business model e que nós queríamos fazer e que, por outro lado, nos reduzisse os riscos, quer riscos de shortage, portanto, riscos de querermos mais e não termos, riscos de falta de disponibilidade, riscos de qualquer disparate financeiro no futuro próximo ou riscos regulatórios associados àquilo que é a nossa atividade. Por um lado. Por outro lado, a Comissão Executiva, enfim, o Board, está muitíssimo interessado em garantir que, pelo menos, a companhia dura mais 135 anos e, portanto, que estamos a atingir o nosso tempo médio de vida e não o fim da vida. E, portanto, há um conjunto de fatores que, independentemente de serem legais ou não serem, são absolutamente críticos, entre os quais a garantia de que a informação confidencial que temos dos clientes se mantém confidencial. Não tanto pelo medo daquilo que o Estado ou o sistema judicial pode fazer se descobrir que nós não estamos a tomar cuidado com a informação confidencial dos clientes, mas pelo simples facto de que se de facto não tomarmos, os clientes se vão embora e, portanto, se os clientes se forem embora, a companhia fecha. E isso é que é uma situação que é francamente desagradável, porque, enfim, dá-nos jeito. E, portanto, o ter cuidado com essas questões regulatórias aparece, nomeadamente, da componente de bom senso e da componente de boas práticas de negócio que estão associadas à própria legislação, mais do que o truque e o jogo de saber quantos advogados é que vão dizer que nós podemos fazer isto ou quantos advogados é que vão dizer que não podemos fazer. Associado a um outro fator, que é a companhia não tem planos para ter nenhuma cloud. Como não temos montes de outras coisas. Nós somos uma companhia de seguros, portanto temos apólices, temos sinistros, mas não temos empresas que fazem automóveis, não temos, enfim, coisas dessas. Nós utilizamos aquelas clouds naquilo que faz sentido utilizá-las da mesma forma que utilizamos qualquer outra tecnologia que esteja disponível para nos resolver o problema. Por exemplo, na questão da internacionalização, o ser multigeografia, ou melhor, o não ser geografia, é um fator determinante. Porque se eu quero ter uma plataforma que é capaz de me suportar a operação em Portugal, mas também é capaz de a suportar em Angola, ou na Líbia, ou em Espanha, ou em Cabo Verde, a questão da geografia das duas uma. Ou é um problema, que tenho múltiplas geografias, ou se não tiver geografia deixa de ser um problema. E, portanto, o que me interessa mesmo é não ter geografia. Se a questão do CRM, em que eu tenho que conhecer um cliente onde quer que ele esteja, e nós temos muitos clientes que estão connosco nesta aventura da internacionalização, e quer que o mesmo cliente tenha o mesmo tratamento, quer vá a um escritório da tranquilidade em Lisboa, ou a um escritório da tranquilidade, num parceiro da tranquilidade em Cabo Verde, então, se calhar ter um CRM em que eu tenha informação que não é confidencial do negócio, mas que é informação CRM, para que quem atende o cliente do outro lado saiba de quem eu estou a falar sem geografia, então se calhar isto é uma grande vantagem. Do mesmo modo, se eu tiver a capacidade dos meus colaboradores, que são a coisa mais importante que a companhia tem, para além dos clientes, serem capazes de serem profissionais com informação que lhes permite ser competente em qualquer sítio em que se encontrem, então é aí que eu quero estar. Portanto, nós não temos cloud, não pensamos vir a ter. Todas as clouds que usamos, do nosso ponto de vista, são clouds privadas, porque a informação que lá pomos é nossa e nós temos tanta certeza quanto aquilo que é humanamente possível ter de que ela se mantém privada. Mas é por aqui, portanto, não é no sentido de ter uma infraestrutura de cloud, seja da companhia, não é de todo o approach que nós temos vindo a ter. Portanto, respondendo ali à pergunta do Paulo, como é que se convence o board? Bom, eu tenho a grande vantagem de trabalhar numa companhia de seguros, portanto, de trabalhar numa companhia que está habituada e que faz parte do seu DNA a avaliar riscos e que vive de avaliar bem os riscos. Quando os avalia mal, a coisa corre mal, não é? E, portanto, o processo de venda ao board é exatamente abrindo o risco, desmistificando, tirando-lhe as camadas monumentais de marketing e de contra-informação que estão associadas a estes movimentos todos e pondo o branco no preto, que é saber onde é que eu estou mais seguro. Numa infraestrutura que tem centenas de milhões de caixas de correio, em que as minhas 5.400 caixas são uma microgota num gigantesco oceano e que garantem este serviço. Assumo o risco, ou não assumo, enfim, nem todas as ideias que eu lhes tenho levado têm sido aprovadas, naturalmente, mas uma boa parte delas têm sido nesta lógica, neste funcionamento, que é, olha, o problema é este, o risco é este, as soluções são estas, o custo é este. Endgame disto. Bom, o projeto de mudança, o processo de mudança era suposto terminar agora em dezembro de 2010, ele na prática terminou em maio de 2010. Como eu vos disse, nós gastámos em 2019,4 milhões de euros, foram os nossos custos com os sistemas de informação. Em 2010, vamos chegar ao fim do ano com um valor que anda próximo dos 9,1 milhões de euros. Em 2000 tínhamos uma companhia que tinha 1.100 funcionários e tinha cerca de 200 parceiros, agentes e mediadores. Em 2010 temos uma operação em Portugal, 2 operações em Espanha, uma operação em Angola, uma operação a arrancar na Líbia, 2 parcerias, uma em Moçambique e outra em Cabo Verde. Somos em Portugal 4 companhias, vocacionadas para segmentos e para áreas de negócio completamente diferentes, e temos cerca de 5.400 parceiros a trabalharem connosco diariamente. O que conseguimos fazer foi por causa do cloud computing? Não de todo. O cloud computing foi instrumental. Foi a oferta certa para resolver um problema que havia na altura e que continua a haver e que nos permitiu, mantendo as pessoas e mantendo o tal DNA que torna a companhia aquilo que ela é, portanto, sem ter que fazer renovações massivas e com isso perder uma quantidade monumental de conhecimento, permitiu-nos focar as pessoas naquilo que era mais importante para a companhia, que era o seu core system, aquilo que torna a companhia única, e livrar-nos de uma quantidade de coisas que nos prendiam ao chão e que nos retiravam a capacidade.
Thank you, José. I know that we have a lot of questions, but we don't have time. I will give 1 more minute to Alfonso, Miguel Milano, Miguel Moreira, Renato and Ronald. But I want to start saying this. When I have a problem on my PC and I call an expert, an IT expert, he always starts by asking, have you already done the restart? Companies are demanding more. Companies are demanding not just a simple restart. They are more dynamic, like Tranquilidade and all others. So are you willing to do this kind of revolution or reinstalling? I will start by Alfonso. 1 minute, please.
In any case, I think that, and honestly, I'm being a little bit candid, I think that for all the IT currently, the traditional providers, cloud is a challenge. It will change the market rules we are working on. But the question is not this one. The question is if it's unavoidable, that, and it's unavoidable. So we need to lead that, because the companies cannot expand at the same pace they are doing right now. And they need, and we have some brilliant examples right here, they are gaining a lot of value for being on that business model.
Okay. Miguel?
Hello? Hello, yes. I mean, just following up on Alfonso's comments, yeah, and I think we've all discussed, technology is no longer the issue. A lot of the technology was available. Some new technology has arrived, but it's just additional layers that it complements. I think we have to really focus on other things other than technology. One is policies, processes, and organizational considerations within the companies. Also, I think Renato mentioned this very clearly. We need to build a standard-based ecosystem. Standards are very important for everything, for migration to the cloud, for interoperability, for not avoiding lock-in of vendors. And then, everything related to data privacy and security. I think it's a great opportunity for companies, for startups, for governments. And I think it's the time to go for it and to take risks. And we have 2 very good examples of very successful cloud implementations.
Thank you, Miguel. Miguel Moreira?
Relativamente digamos, ao rate com que o mercado vai aderir a este tipo de serviços, que ao fim e ao cabo acho que é o tema que se está aqui a falar, acho que, como em muitas outras ocasiões, vamos estar enganados. Ninguém vai conseguir acertar exatamente qual vai ser a velocidade com que este negócio vai crescer. No entanto, eu penso que é importante já ter algumas conclusões sobre até algumas apresentações que foram feitas aqui hoje. Vai haver empresas mais agressivas, empresas que vão querer arriscar mais, mas, no entanto, eu penso que uma abordagem segmentada, começando não por tudo ou nada, mas começando por aplicações menos críticas, criando menos barreiras às decisões, pode ser uma forma de experimentação e que depois, com bons resultados, podem levar a uma aceleração na utilização deste tipo de serviços. Eu penso que também vai haver um fator que é o ciclo de investimento, ou seja, nós sabemos que as infraestruturas têm um tempo de vida e vai haver um momento de tomada de decisão. Um cliente, mesmo que esteja algo relutante a entrar para este modelo, no contexto económico atual, não vai deixar de o considerar no momento de tomar uma decisão de investimento. E aqui, assim, os números podem falar mais alto e eu penso que os ciclos, que normalmente são de 3, 4 anos, estão sempre a terminar, em contínuo, e esse pode ser também um momento de forçar a experimentação. Portanto, eu penso que a segmentação e a experimentação podem ser elementos que podem acelerar o take-up deste modelo de negócio.
Obrigado, Miguel. Renato?
I think I'll start with the approach that you took as an insurance company. From a personal level, it's I just recently renewed my life insurance. And that type of approach that insurance companies take of mitigating the risk by doing an analysis of what are the risks, how can I manage those risks as I offload stuff that I was doing in my data center to a cloud provider, essentially, PT. That type of process of risk assessment and what types of applications and how quickly and the more traction you get seems to me to be a very good approach to stepping into cloud. From an IBM standpoint, we got to talk about what IBM offers in that environment. We offer to those cloud providers at those various levels the infrastructure so that you can play at each of those, at each of those levels. And I think you could probably say the same. You could say something similar for HP and something similar for Oracle as options.
Well, the question is this a restart? I think for Microsoft, the answer is yes and no, both. I mean, there's no question that cloud computing is a paradigm shift. And we've been thinking about cloud computing for a lot longer than we've been talking about it. With Maria Ozzie came on board about 5.5 years ago, we really started thinking hard about cloud computing, and those dividends are being paid today. We're talking about a lot more the last couple of years, and I think we're learning as we go. If you look at the slide I showed at the beginning of my presentation, that looks a lot different now than it did 6 months ago. And so watch this space. I bet it'll look different in another 6 months, but I think it's a paradigm shift. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's lots of opportunities, not only for companies like Microsoft, but for everyone in the room to participate.
Thank you. Thank you all for being so patient. Let's lunch. Thank you all.